The distant wail of a woman's scream pierced the twilight air as Eliza Greenfield clutched her swollen belly, beads of sweat forming along her brow despite the cool spring evening. The year was 1878, and this remote homestead in the Montana Territory was no place for a woman to give birth alone. Especially not after Randall, her husband of 3 years, had stormed out just hours earlier, saddled his horse and galloped away toward the nearest saloon 20 miles distant, his parting words still burning in her ears. "I never wanted this life, never wanted this child." Eliza gripped the edge of the rough-hewn table as another contraction tore through her, stronger than the last. The baby was coming, there was no denying it now. She'd known Randall was a coward, but never imagined he'd abandon her when she needed him most. She'd married him in St. Louis when she was 20, thinking his talk of adventure and frontier living sounded romantic. 3 years later, at 23, she understood the harsh realities of such dreams. Another contraction came, and she cried out, sinking to the floor. The nearest neighbor was miles away. The nearest doctor, even further. Panic gripped her as she realized she might have to bring this child into the world entirely on her own. The sound of horse hooves approaching made her heart leap with momentary hope. Had Randall returned? But when the door swung open, it wasn't her husband who filled the frame, but the tall figure of Jake Blackburn, the quiet cowboy who occasionally helped on their small ranch, Mrs. Greenfield. His deep voice held concern as he took in her condition, crumpled on the floor, face contorted in pain. "I was riding back from town when I heard screaming. The baby," she managed between labored breaths. "It's coming, and Randall, he's gone." Jake removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair as he knelt beside her. His blue eyes, usually reserved and distant, now showed something Eliza had never seen before: compassion and determination. "Gone where?" he asked, already helping her toward the bedroom. "Just gone," she gasped, another contraction making her double over. "Said he never wanted this. Left me here to do this alone." The cowboy's jaw tightened as understanding dawned. He'd worked for the Greenfields off and on for nearly a year, never much caring for Randall, but respecting the man's wife for her tenacity and kindness. At 28, Jake had seen his share of cowards, but abandoning a wife in labor reached a new low. "Then I'll be here to hold you through it," he said simply, his voice steady and certain. "You ain't alone, Mrs. Greenfield." Eliza looked up at him, surprise momentarily overriding her pain. In all the months he'd worked for them, Jake had hardly spoken more than a few sentences at a time. Now here he was, offering to help her through the most intimate and frightening moment of her life. I can't ask that of you," she whispered. "You didn't ask, I'm offering." He helped her onto the bed. "My ma was a midwife back in Kansas. I helped her sometimes. I know what to do." Before Eliza could respond, another contraction hit, stronger than before. She cried out, clutching Jake's hand with unexpected force. To his credit, he didn't flinch, just held on firmly. "Breathe through it," he instructed gently. "That's it. In through your nose, out through your mouth." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion for Eliza. Jake proved remarkably calm and capable, heating water, gathering clean linens, and coaching her through each contraction with steady words of encouragement. When panic threatened to overwhelm her, his deep voice would ground her, reminding her that she was strong enough for this. As dawn broke over the Montana hills, Eliza's daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the small cabin. Jake carefully cleaned the infant before placing her in Eliza's trembling arms. "You have a daughter, Mrs. Greenfield," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "A beautiful, healthy little girl." Tears streamed down Eliza's face as she gazed at her daughter's perfect features. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at the cowboy who had stayed true to his word, holding her through the entire ordeal. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Jake cleared his throat, suddenly awkward now that the emergency had passed. "Just did what anyone would do," but they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have stepped up the way he had, certainly not Randall. "I should go," Jake said, moving toward the door. "You need rest. I'll check in on you both later, bring some food from town." Before he could leave, Eliza called out, "Jake, what's your full name? I realized I don't even know." He paused at the doorway, hat already back on his head. "Jacob." Jacob Blackburn. With that, he was gone, leaving Eliza with her newborn daughter and a strange new feeling amidst her exhaustion, something like hope. 3 days passed with no sign of Randall. Jake had been true to his word, returning daily with supplies and checking on both mother and child. He chopped wood for their stove, repaired a leak in the roof that had been bothering Eliza for months, and even managed to coax milk from their temperamental cow, a feat Randall had never mastered. On the fourth morning, Jake arrived to find Eliza sitting on the porch, her daughter cradled in her arms. "Good morning, Mrs. Greenfield," he said, tipping his hat. "How are you both today?" "Please," she said with a small smile, "call me Eliza. After what we've been through, Mrs. Greenfield seems terribly formal," Jake nodded, a faint color touching his weathered cheeks. "Eliza, then. And this," she said, looking down at her sleeping daughter, "is Sarah, Sarah Jane Greenfield." Jake's eyes widened slightly. "Jane." "After the person who helped bring her into this world," Eliza said softly, "if that's all right with you." "I'm honored," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. They fell into a comfortable routine over the following weeks. Jake would arrive each morning to help with the heavier chores, then return to his small cabin on the neighboring property. Sometimes they would share a simple meal, talking about the day's work or the baby's progress. Never once did Jake ask about Randall or whether Eliza expected him to return. That unspoken question hung between them, acknowledged but untouched. It was nearly a month after Sarah's birth when the sheriff from town, Bill Jenkins, rode up to the homestead. Eliza was hanging laundry while Jake repaired a broken wagon wheel nearby. "Mrs. Greenfield," the sheriff said, removing his hat, "I'm afraid I have some news about your husband." Eliza's hands stilled on the wet sheet she was pinning to the line. "What's happened?" Sheriff Jenkins glanced uncomfortably at Jake, who had set down his tools and moved protectively closer to Eliza. "Randall was involved in a poker game at the Silver Dollar. Things got heated. Accusations of cheating were made." The sheriff sighed heavily. "He drew on another player, wasn't fast enough. I'm sorry to tell you, madam, but your husband is dead." Eliza felt strangely numb. She had expected to feel something: grief, anger, perhaps even relief, but instead, there was only a hollow emptiness. "I understand he left you some weeks back," the sheriff continued. "Left you in a delicate condition from what I hear." "Yes," Eliza confirmed, her voice steady. "He did." "That's a mighty low thing to do," Jenkins said, shaking his head. "Well, for what it's worth, he didn't have much on him when he died, just his horse and saddle, which I've brought back for you. There's also the matter of the homestead. As his widow, it's yours now, free and clear." Eliza nodded, taking in this new reality. She was a widow at 23 with an infant daughter and a ranch to run alone, except she wasn't alone. She glanced at Jake, who stood nearby, his face carefully neutral but his eyes watching her with concern. After the sheriff departed, Jake approached her cautiously. "I'm sorry about Randall," he said. "Are you?" she asked, not unkindly. Jake considered this. "I'm sorry for your loss," he clarified, "and for Sarah's. Every child deserves a father." "He wasn't much of one," Eliza said, surprising herself with her honesty. "He wasn't much of a husband either toward the end." That evening, after Sarah had been fed and laid down to sleep, Eliza joined Jake on the porch. The summer evening was warm, fireflies blinking in the gathering dusk. "I should be grieving," she confessed, staring out at the darkening landscape. "But all I feel is uncertainty. I don't know how I'll manage this place on my own." Jake was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "You don't have to do it alone, Eliza." She turned to look at him, really look at him, perhaps for the first time. The setting sun cast golden light across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the kindness in his blue eyes. "What are you saying, Jake?" "I'm saying I could stay on, help you run this place." He met her gaze steadily. No strings attached, just one neighbor helping another. Eliza felt a rush of gratitude, but also something else she couldn't quite name. "I can't pay you much," she warned. "I'm not asking for payment," he replied. "Just a purpose, something worth doing." And so it began their partnership of necessity. Jake moved his few possessions into the small bunkhouse behind the main cabin. Each day they worked side by side, tending the livestock, mending fences, and preparing for the coming harvest. Eliza found herself watching him sometimes, The way he handled Sarah with such gentleness, his large hands cradling her tiny form with absolute confidence. The way he seemed to anticipate Eliza's needs before she voiced them. The way his rare smiles transformed his entire face, making him look years younger. Summer gave way to autumn, the Montana landscape changing from vibrant greens to rich golds and reds. Sarah grew stronger each day, her personality emerging stubborn like her mother, with a quiet watchfulness that reminded Eliza of Jake. One crisp October morning, Eliza was kneading bread dough when she heard Jake curse outside, followed by a clatter. She rushed to the door to find him clutching his hand, blood seeping between his fingers. "What happened?" she asked, hurrying to his side. "Wasn't paying attention," he grimaced. "Sliced my palm on that broken plow blade." Eliza led him inside, sitting him at the table while she gathered clean cloths and water. "Let me see," she instructed, gently taking his hand in hers. The cut was deep, running across his palm. "This needs stitching," she said, meeting his eyes. "I can do it if you'll let me." Jake nodded, his jaw tight. Eliza worked quickly, cleaning the wound before threading a needle. As she began the first stitch, she felt him tense. "Talk to me," she said, trying to distract him. "Tell me something about yourself. Where were you before you came to Montana?" Jake took a deep breath. "Colorado, mostly. Drove cattle up from Texas a few times. Worked mines in Nevada for a spell." "Family?" she asked, carefully placing another stitch. A shadow crossed his face. "None to speak of. Ma died when I was 16, never knew my pa." "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly, pausing in her work to meet his eyes. "What about you?" he asked. "How did a proper lady like yourself end up in the wilds of Montana?" Eliza smiled wryly as she continued stitching. "I was never very proper. My parents despaired of me. Always had my nose in adventure stories, dreaming of places beyond St. Louis. When Randall came along with his big talk of frontier opportunities, I was easy prey." "You're nobody's prey, Eliza," Jake said with unexpected fierceness. "You're the strongest person I know." The conviction in his voice made her hands falter. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. For a breathless moment, something unspoken passed between them. Sarah's cry from the other room broke the spell. Eliza quickly finished the last stitch and bandaged Jake's hand, aware of the lingering warmth where their skin had touched. That night, long after Sarah had been put to bed, Eliza stood at her window, watching as Jake sat alone by a small fire outside the bunkhouse. The orange glow illuminated his profile as he stared into the flames, lost in thought. Without fully understanding why, she found herself putting on her shawl and stepping outside into the cool night air. Jake looked up as she approached, surprise evident on his face. "Everything all right?" he asked, starting to rise. "Everything's fine," she assured him, gesturing for him to stay seated. "Sarah's sleeping soundly. I couldn't sleep." He nodded, making room for her on the rough bench beside him. For a while they sat in companionable silence, watching the flames dance. "Thank you," Eliza said finally, "for everything you've done for us. I don't think I've properly said that yet." Jake shook his head. "No need for thanks." "There is," she insisted. "You came into our lives when we needed someone most. You've asked for nothing in return. A thank you seems the least I can offer." The firelight caught the slight curve of his lips. "You've given me more than you know, Eliza." "What do you mean?" He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Before I came here, I was just drifting, no purpose, no connections." "Now," he trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words. "Now," she prompted gently. Jake turned to face her, the firelight illuminating the emotion in his eyes. "Now I look forward to each day, to seeing you and Sarah, to building something that matters." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her with such simple honesty before. "I should go," she said, suddenly flustered. "It's late." As she stood, Jake caught her hand, stopping her. "Eliza," he said, her name a question and a plea. She knew she should pull away, that it was too soon after Randall's death for the feelings stirring within her. But as Jake slowly stood, still holding her hand, she found herself unable to move. "I won't presume," he said softly. "I know your husband's only been gone a few months. I know you're still finding your way, but I need you to know that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." Eliza felt tears spring to her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "I don't know what I'm ready for," she admitted. "Everything's happened so fast." Randall leaving, Sarah being born, becoming a widow. Sometimes I feel like I'm just keeping my head above water. Jake released her hand, nodding in understanding. "There's no rush, Eliza. Some things are worth waiting for." Winter descended on Montana with a vengeance that year. Heavy snows isolated the homestead, turning their world white and silent. Inside the cabin, life took on a new rhythm. Jake had moved into the main house at Eliza's insistence. The bunkhouse was simply too cold, and it made no sense for him to risk freezing when there was a perfectly good spare room. The long evenings were filled with quiet conversation by the fire, Jake teaching Eliza how to play chess, Eliza reading aloud from one of her precious books. Sarah grew and changed daily, now smiling and cooing, her eyes tracking them both around the room. It was during one of those peaceful evenings that disaster struck. Eliza had just put Sarah down for the night when Jake, who had gone to check on the animals in the barn, burst through the door, his face grave. "Fire," he said urgently. "The barn, it's spreading fast." Eliza's heart plummeted. The barn contained not only their livestock but also the winter feed for the animals and most of their stored crops, their livelihood. "Sarah," she gasped, already moving toward her daughter's cradle. "Get her bundled up," Jake instructed, already gathering buckets. "We need to try to save what we can, but if it gets too close to the house, we'll have to leave." The next hours were a desperate battle against the flames. Despite the snow, the dry wood of the old barn burned fiercely. Jake fought tirelessly to control the blaze while Eliza managed to lead the terrified horses and their milk cow to safety, Sarah securely wrapped and nestled in a makeshift shelter away from the danger. By dawn, it was over. The barn was gone, a smoking ruin against the snow-covered landscape. Jake's face and hands were singed, his clothes smoke damaged beyond repair. Eliza wasn't much better, soot streaking her exhausted features. "We saved what matters," Jake said hoarsely, looking at the animals huddled under a makeshift shelter and at Sarah, miraculously sleeping through it all. "The rest we can rebuild." But Eliza knew the reality was grim. Without the stored feed, their animals might not survive the winter. Without the barn, they had no shelter for the livestock or storage for next year's harvest. The homestead, which had been barely sustainable before, now seemed an impossible challenge. That night, after rigging temporary shelter for the animals, they sat at the kitchen table, both too exhausted to sleep. "We could sell," Eliza said finally, voicing the thought that had been haunting her all day. "Take Sarah and go back east. My parents would take us in, at least until I could find work." Jake's face remained carefully neutral. "Is that what you want?" Eliza looked around the simple cabin that had become home, thought of the land they'd worked together, the future they'd begun to build. "No," she admitted, "but I don't see how we can stay. We don't have the money to rebuild, and even if we did, it wouldn't be done before spring." "What if I told you there was another option?" Jake said carefully. Eliza looked at him questioningly. "I've been saving," he explained. "Almost every dollar I've earned over the last 10 years, never had reason to spend it, never had something worth investing in, until now." Hope flickered in Eliza's chest. "You'd invest in the ranch in our future," he corrected, then faltered. "That is, if you want there to be an hour." Eliza's heart pounded in her ears. "What are you saying, Jake?" He reached across the table, taking her soot-stained hands in his. "I'm saying I love you, Eliza. I think I've loved you since that night Sarah was born. I love that little girl like she was my own, and I'm asking if you might consider making this partnership permanent." Tears filled Eliza's eyes. In that moment, the months of working side by side, of shared meals and quiet evenings, of building trust and friendship, crystallized into something she could no longer deny. She loved him too. "It hasn't even been a year since Randall died," she whispered, though her heart was already answering differently. "I know," Jake acknowledged, "and I'll wait as long as you need, but I also know life out here is uncertain. That fire could have taken everything, including us. It made me realize I don't want to waste another day not telling you how I feel." Eliza looked into the eyes of the man who had stood by her through birth and death, through struggle and small triumphs. The man who had never asked for anything but now was asking for everything: her heart, her future, a family. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with certainty. "Yes, I want there to be an hour." The joy that transformed Jake's face was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. He rose from his chair, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. Their first kiss was tender, a promise and a beginning. Spring came early that year. The new barn, built with Jake's savings and the help of neighbors who rallied around the young family, stood solid and ready for the season ahead. Inside the cabin, another kind of preparation was underway. "Hold still," Ellen Jenkins, the sheriff's wife, instructed as she adjusted the simple white dress she'd helped Eliza sew. "There, you look beautiful." Eliza gazed at her reflection in the small mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The past year had changed her in ways both visible and invisible. The young woman who had followed her husband west with romantic notions of frontier life was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had faced abandonment, childbirth, widowhood, and near ruin, yet emerged more certain of herself and her path. "Do you think Jake will like it?" she asked, smoothing the dress nervously. Ellen laughed. "That man would think you beautiful in a potato sack, dear. He won't be able to take his eyes off you." Outside, the small gathering of neighbors and friends waited in the spring sunshine. Sarah, now 9 months old and determined to crawl everywhere, was being entertained by the sheriff while the minister from town prepared for the ceremony. When Eliza stepped outside, her eyes immediately found Jake. He stood tall and clean-shaven, wearing a new shirt and his least worn pair of denims. But it was the expression on his face that took her breath away, a mixture of awe, love, and absolute certainty. As she walked toward him, Eliza thought of the night they had met, she in pain and afraid, he steady and unflinching. "Then I'll be here to hold you through it," he had promised. It was a promise he had kept through every challenge since, and one she knew he would keep for all their days ahead. They spoke their vows under the Montana sky. Sarah balanced on Jake's hip, reaching occasionally for her mother's face. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jake kissed Eliza with a tenderness that made the women in attendance sigh and the men shuffle their feet, embarrassed by such open display of emotion. "Mrs. Blackburn," Jake whispered against her lips. "Mr. Blackburn," she returned, smiling. The celebration continued well into the evening, neighbors having brought food and drink to share. As twilight descended, Jake found Eliza sitting on the porch, watching as Sarah, exhausted from the excitement, slept in the arms of Ellen Jenkins. "Happy?" he asked, settling beside her, his arm naturally finding its place around her shoulders. "More than I knew was possible," she answered honestly, leaning into him. Jake's eyes followed her gaze to Sarah. "She's going to need siblings, you know. This place is too big for just one child." Eliza laughed, color rising in her cheeks. "Is that so? He affirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'm thinking at least 3 more. You seem very certain about our future, Mr. Blackburn." "I am certain about one thing," he said, turning her to face him. "Whatever comes, good harvests or bad, easy times or hard, I'll be here to hold you through it all. That's the one promise I can make." Eliza reached up to touch his face, marveling at how this man, once a stranger, had become her whole world. "And I'll hold you right back," she promised. As stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, they sat together on the porch of their home, the future stretching before them like an open trail, uncertain in its details but sure in its direction. Together. 5 years later, Eliza stood on that same porch, watching as Jake taught their oldest son, James, how to gentle a colt. Sarah, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's determination and her adoptive father's quiet strength, sat atop the corral fence, calling out encouragement. Baby Rachel, not yet a year old, dozed in Eliza's arms, her tiny fingers curled around one of her mother's. The homestead had prospered under their joint care. The barn had been joined by a smokehouse, a larger chicken coop, and an addition to the main cabin to accommodate their growing family. What had once been Randall Greenfield's struggling attempt at ranching was now the respected Blackburn farm, known for its fine horses and healthy crops. "Mama, look," Sarah called excitedly as James, under Jake's watchful guidance, successfully led the young horse in a circle. I see, darling. Eliza called back, her heart full at the sight of her family. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Jake joined Eliza on the porch, just as he had countless nights before. The routine was familiar, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, both of them taking in the peace of the evening after a day's work. "Do you ever think about that night?" Eliza asked softly. "The night Sarah was born." Jake's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes. Why?" "I was just thinking how close we came to never having this," she explained. "If you hadn't ridden by when you did." "But I did," he reminded her. "Some things are meant to be, Eliza. I believe that." She turned to look at him, this man who had walked into her darkest moment and brought light. "So do I," she said, reaching up to trace the familiar lines of his face. "I believe we were always heading toward each other, even when we didn't know it." Jake caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I knew at the moment I saw you. Even in pain, even afraid, there was something about you that called to me, something that said here is where you belong." "And do you?" she asked. "Belong," his answer was in the kiss he gave her, tender yet passionate after all these years. When they finally broke apart, his blue eyes held hers, sincere as always. "Every day with you feels like coming home," he said. "Every day I thank whatever twist of fate brought me to your door that night." Eliza smiled, thinking of the journey they had traveled together, from strangers to partners to lovers to family. A journey that had begun with 7 simple words spoken in her darkest hour. "Then I'll be here to hold you," and he always had been.